I'm sure in your world, everyone knows you are. In the data center side, which is our two worlds are colliding right now.
Right.
Do you agree?
Big time.
I mean, thus the fact that we're both sitting down, we didn't know each other until Miami, right? But the reality is there's a conversation that has to be had, and there's terms that are being thrown around all the time.
Right.
And there's units of metrics for power that are being thrown around all the time. And I don't think people fully understand or appreciate what those magnitudes of power really equate to.
No.
And what the capabilities and limitation are from a natural gas perspective as a minimum, right? So to that end, why don't you introduce yourself? Because this is a part of the industry that some of us are the blindest in, but now being tasked with understanding at the highest level, right? So now I'm spending time with you. I was with you in Miami, but I'm trying to get educated. I'm trying to learn. So introduce yourself. And
which is crazy because this is like the biggest power consuming industry out there.
Isn't it crazy?
Not a lot of knowledge.
And it's funny because we used to just rely on the utility providers to solve all the power problems, and those days are over, right? Because the surge of demand or the adoption rate of emerging technologies exceeded what the grid can put out there. And we saw the red flag through Dominion, right, in Virginia, when they're like, hey, man, we're going to start clawing people back, or we're going to start making sure you're using what you paid for. And what it's going to do is we're seeing this massive shift where people are like now in markets that are non-traditional data center markets. And maybe one of the things that's drawing them to that market is access to natural gas. Right. So now we're seeing second and third tier markets emerging and developing in a way that we've never seen before. And we know that the utility's not going to get there. So we're going to put primary power online somehow, and it's not going to be traditional from the utility provider. So we have to go to these deregulated energy markets. And I don't know what that looks like, right? So it is crazy to think, and I say this because we are massive users of power, but I don't want it to be seen as parasitic, right? Where I think society may think, oh, these data centers, we don't want them because they just soak up so much power.
And you're seeing a little about that start already.
And they don't really get it, right? They don't realize what that power demand equates to them as the consumer, with the eyeball content, video caching, the tweets, the uploads, the downloads, the streaming, right? And all that content that's being created by us, the humans, as well as AI now, like that requires massive volumes of power. And people don't realize, like, if you're worried about data centers' power, capacity, demand draws, then why don't you think about how it's not about like leaving your lights on. Why don't you chat GPT a few more less questions, you know, because we're originating and aggregating this huge demand of power. So the fact that we're talking is a good sign, right? Because now I need to learn your industry, and simultaneously I need to help you learn more about ours. So that's what the genesis of this podcast is, right? Where I'm like, hey man, let's have this conversation. And we probably ought to thank, who's the guy on your team that was just relentless as hell?
Ralph.
Yeah.
He's the LinkedIn beast.
That guy is all I see is that a jujitsu
content machine
who will tear people apart if you piss him off the wrong way. He's your bodyguard, right?
Sometimes.
Yeah, man, he's the real deal. So, Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, so Dan Crosby with Legend Energy Advisors, started this a little over 10 years ago. My background was engineering, then construction, and then kind of by accident got into this space, actually through waiting tables after losing everything at 30.
Where are you from? Tell me the story, because you told me some of this when we were in Miami. So.
Yeah, so I grew up on the West Coast. All my family is California and Oregon. Everybody in my family went to USC or Stanford. I was actually born at Stanford. And
really?
My dad, as a freshman, told me I had to go more than 1,000 miles away to college.
Okay.
So I talked my best friend into going to Baylor with me, and then bailed on him. And,
nice. You're one of those guys.
Yeah.
I seen that. Like in the movie Stripes, remember he leans forward like he's volunteering and he doesn't. The other guy steps forward, he's like, damn.
So I actually was applied to Furman.
Okay.
And had deferment to get in there the winter semester. And so I decided just to go to Auburn. Never been in the state of Alabama in my life. 3 days before class started, just showed up, went.
For real?
And I had Furman as a backup if I wanted to bail. But
did you have any friends there?
No.
Did you know anybody there?
Didn't know a soul. Showed up as the guy from Oregon in Alabama.
And then just like you met friends through your roommates there?
Yeah, no, just joined a fraternity and just never looked back. It was so much fun. I actually started out in pre-med. I decided I wanted to be a reconstructive pediatric facial surgeon when I was like 10.
Really?
Got through organic chemistry and all that and realized I hated school. So I switched to chemical engineering, then mechanical engineering. And then I got a business minor and started building decks and docks and doing construction in Atlanta my senior year.
Is that where you ended up? Yeah, we talked about this. You were in Atlanta when you got...
Yeah, so I first started in Atlanta and then moved all that to Nashville and did that for about 4 years. And then 2008, just blew up. I lost everything. So I moved to Dallas and slept on a friend's couch, started waiting tables. And at first started getting into landman stuff for a private equity fund, just kind of proving that I could do something other than be an entrepreneur. And through the waiting tables job, this energy job in sales, and it was one of those, there's your cubicle, there's your phone, go figure it out jobs.
Yeah. Nice. We all need one of those at some point.
But no, I figured out real quickly that they just didn't have the resources to go after what we were trying to go after in the market. Got recruited by another company, picked up a bunch of like big oil and gas terminals, industrial portfolios, and then they forcefully moved me to Connecticut to build their national accounts group, and then left there, started another retail energy group. And my biggest frustration was, energy is a real-time market. Like the power price is changing every 15 minutes to an hour, depending on which market you're in. Texas is a 5-minute sched run. And yet people are managing energy, month behind, year behind. Like,
how do you do that with any degree of accuracy?
It's crazy. And so the whole genesis of Legend was actually to be able to manage energy in real time against real-time markets. And so
explain that. You were mentioning to me that there's a clock that is out of sync with the way that energy is traded.
Well, so the gas and power markets are off, right? So the power market's midnight to midnight, and the gas market's 9 a.m. to 9 a.m. And obviously, gas is the marginal driver of fuel, or marginal fuel driver in power. And so in almost every market, that's what's going to drive your marginal price. In the Northeast, there's some nuances in the fact that we still actually roll back to oil because that market's so pipeline constrained. And you have some markets like Alberta where wind's actually sitting on the margin, which is really almost impossible to budget. But for the most part, if you look at almost every, especially this time of year, if you look at every market in North America, gas is going to be the marginal driver of fuel.
Natural gas?
Natural gas.
Okay.
And so those are the, peaking plants that can turn on, turn off. And that's what I think on a macro level, people don't understand is like the grid's literally balanced every several seconds, right? And you always have to have exactly as much power, generating as being consumed. And anytime that gets out of balance at all, everything falls apart. And so that's what the whole frequency response is about, is it's got to stay right there at 60 hertz or everything goes to hell in a handbasket, because that's where a grid, Europe's 50 hertz. But so that balance is constantly going on. And forever, people ignored it. If you think about it's going back a ways, but 50 years ago, like a power outage was a nuisance, right? Now it's catastrophic. Like all sorts of things are based on data. The internet, cell modems and all this stuff, when all that stuff starts to crash, it's really a catastrophic thing now, where it was much more of let's light some candles and how long is this going to last? And so that's the big change. And so, obviously you have very different markets across the US. You have regulated, you have deregulated, you have different fuel mixes, different regulations, different pricing metrics. And so, that's kind of part of what makes this whole thing seem so nebulous and confusing to people. And that's really kind of what we're trying to demystify, is really understanding, what you're doing as a customer and then what's going on in the market. And that's the reality. Like we'd forever kind of in the brokerage side of the business, customers say, hey, my bill almost doubled this month. What happened? I was like, your usage almost doubled. What'd you do? I don't know. And so until you really understand volumetric risk on your side, and then more importantly, how much of that volumetric risk can you actually do something about, right? And this is why data centers have, N+1 generation, is they don't take volumetric risk. And so, but until you understand those things, and this is kind of the whole, electric vehicles adding a significant load to a house, which changes things, you got to understand that. And that's why residential customers pay this massive premium compared to a commercial or even an industrial customer. Is an industrial customer is much closer to the market. And so, when everything fell apart in, Uri in Texas, the industrial customers are the ones where you saw just massive swings in bills, where customers, on the residential side were out of power and had a fixed rate, and it wasn't financially catastrophic unless they were doing something nuanced, which Texas now eliminated. And so that's the complexity. And that's really kind of the genesis of what Legend was founded to do. And
what was it exactly? Because I want you to break it down, realize that this audience will be mainly veterans or data center experts or data center veterans, military veterans or data center veterans. And we tend to only know what we have to know. Does that make sense? I only will study as much about this as I have to be able to bring value to my clients. Right. So at a certain point, all of us listening right now are going to be kind of starting from zero. Yep. So walk us through some of, like, you could take us back to where natural gas began. You know, I mean, we're talking about natural gas now as a new application to data centers, but it's not a new application in period.
No.
I mean, we've
always had more nameplate gas generation than coal.
Really? So I don't think people know that.
Right. So forever, long time, we've had a much higher nameplate capacity of natural gas generation on the grid than coal.
For real.
But coal was much more highly utilized. And really, back in, I guess it was like the early 2000s into the early teens is really when you saw the shale boom happened and natural gas got crazy cheap and basically economically pushed coal out of the stack. Now there's, obviously environmental regulations and other things that impacted that. But at the end of the day, the coal to gas switching was always something that we've paid very close attention to in power markets because that will cause a dynamic shift in pricing. And part of that's because coal plants, like a lot of other generation, they want to turn on and they want to run and they want to go steady.
Steady state.
Right. And the combined cycle in gas the same way. But gas GTs or gas turbines, they turn on, they're there, and they turn right back off. Same thing with engines. Turbines tend to be, obviously a bigger size.
Reciprocating engines, you mean? Yeah.
Exactly.
Because those are the two options, turbines and reciprocating, right? Correct. So the advantages and disadvantages of those two are what again? One is one is really meant more for standby, right? And the other one's for prime?
There's a lot of guys advocating using reciprocating engines in prime power. So a reciprocating engine is more efficient, yes. Electrically efficient than a turbine. A turbine is going to produce more heat. So if you have a cogen opportunity, like we have cogen stuff we're working on right now, a turbine makes more sense. Where if you're just trying to get electricity, then a reciprocating engine is going to have a higher efficiency or a heat rate. And effectively what a heat rate is how efficiently does that unit turn natural gas into power? And actually the whole Texas market and ERCOT trades on heat rates. So everything's a heat rate
really?
In Texas in the wholesale market. And one of the things we're seeing now is a pretty big decoupling of that because of a lot of other risk factors that are being introduced to the market. But yeah, those are the two primary. And then on the gas turbine side, you also have combined cycle. That's harder with a reciprocating engine. One, because they're smaller, but two, basically you're generating, it's just a jet engine. And so the blast off the back of that, and then there's also in a HRSG, you can actually add afterburners to increase the heat. Now you're boiling water, making steam run through that steam turbine.
Yeah.
So you're getting a higher overall efficiency for that unit. And if you're going to run 24/7, that's the other thing about turbines is they can run for, some of them now can run for a year without taking them offline. And then you bring them down, do your maintenance for an hour, a day and a half, whatever it may be, and then bring them back online. Where reciprocating engines, there's a lot more moving parts. There's things you got to service on a somewhat regular basis. Although that is increasing as well as the size. And I think some of that is really going to come to bear in the data center space. And like you're saying, the data centers, I remember when a 5 megawatt data center was a big deal.
Me too.
And then it was 50. And, now it's a gig.
Starting with G's.
Right.
It's crazy.
Yeah. It went, and I think people throw that. I remember when Bitcoin started going nuts back in like 2014 and 15. And some kid called me and he's like, hey, we want to put in 2,500 megawatts of Bitcoin. And it's like, all right, well, go build a nuke.
Yeah.
What? Why are you talking to me?
Yeah. It's untenable with that type of application of technology for that volume of power.
Well, and people throw that out like they don't really understand. Like when you start to think about how much power that, like what it does in other things in life, that's a medium-sized town.
Yeah.
And so that's the kind of technology difference. And then obviously you have a whole bunch of other things in the bid stack that, run differently. Renewables is obviously a big challenge right now, especially in Texas. We're seeing some really weird handoffs between solar and wind. And so you're getting these, kind of crazy price spikes at like 8 o'clock at night. If that handoff doesn't happen fluidly, where gas gen will jump in and bridge the...
I want people to understand how kinetic and dynamic it is below the water line that they're not seeing, right? Because
in the power market?
Yeah, because power to us, like I use data centers is a term that it means something very specifically to me. And I understand what that lexicon is in the world that I live in. And in yours, I could use I could paint with a really broad stroke and use the word power. And that's not it's too generalized probably. So, again, double tapping on what your company does, I want people to understand when they're done. I don't expect people to have a PhD in power or energy or reciprocating engines or turbines or any of those things. What I want them to understand is they need to go learn more. Like I brought this for you today and I was like, have you got this Goldman Sachs report that just came out? Because it really talks about, what's coming to the US energy or power market as a byproduct of the surge of adoption of AI and other emerging technologies. And I've had conversations with some of these very sophisticated end users, both on the operator side as well as the enterprise side. And like today, one of the largest hyperscalers reached out and was like, look, we're looking for 800 megawatts, right? And 2 weeks ago, a couple of weeks ago, I had CEO of one of the largest operators in the world who's like, yeah, we're starting at a minimum 400 megawatt power plants. There's capabilities and limitations to each application of technology. And Legend Energy doesn't just focus on natural gas. You guys are, what are you doing? You're a brokerage house for commercial and industrial?
Well, there's three parts of our business. So we're an advisor across all North American power and gas markets, regulated and deregulated, and have a pretty balanced.
Can I ask questions as you go, by the way?
Yeah, absolutely.
How much of the United States is regulated and how much is deregulated?
Well, so for natural gas, it's almost everywhere. Vermont's pretty still regulated, but it also depends on how big the load is. But in almost every state, if you're an industrial user, you can probably access deregulated natural gas markets. In power, Texas is deregulated, and then really basically PJM, which is from Chicago all the way over to New Jersey, Maryland, and then up into Pennsylvania is all deregulated, and then basically the whole Northeast. So New York is its own ISO, and then New England ISO is all deregulated with the exception of Vermont. And then beyond that, there's kind of quasi-deregulation. So there's parts of MISO that are deregulated, like part of Illinois. Technically some areas of Virginia are deregulated, but it's kind of nuanced. And then same thing with California. If you got out during the direct access program, you are still on direct access, but everybody else is within that. Oregon's got some deregulated tariffs. There's some stuff in Arizona and Nevada as well, but much more nuanced. They aren't open markets like Texas is.
So I asked that question because there will be markets where the grid won't, like the utility provider won't allow certain power plants to be put online right there.
Correct.
It sounds like. And that's the stuff that I think our listeners will also want to understand. We don't necessarily have to unpack it all today, but knowing that they could come to you as an advisor to understand, because you're going to have people that they do this for a living, right? Where they're hired by an operator and they're supposed to go out and find the space and the power for these large assets. And now they're looking in underserved markets that where they're non-traditional data center markets, which means that we have to learn what the authority having jurisdiction in that market is going to regulate or impose on us. And it's tough, right? So I'm like, are there markets like you mentioned Arizona, and I know that, I heard that Arizona may be closing the faucet on how much power they're going to be releasing in a little bit, unless you're able to put not only the amount of power you need on the grid, plus a certain percentage on top of that.
Right.
So are there certain markets that you're seeing the higher adoption or greater markets for opportunity to grow? Texas is obviously Wild Wild West, right? But like, are there other markets that there's some red flags at right now? Like the major NFL cities that connect the fiber backbone of the United States are how we build our data centers, right? Are there markets outside of those traditional NFL cities that you're seeing where there's power or stranded capacity somewhere that we could get access to before we have to put power on?
Yeah, well, I mean, you're seeing people move to the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
Right? If power is there. And I think fiber is the, interesting component. And now people are building fiber to power, which was always the other way around.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think they're, like you're saying, Arizona, I was on a call actually this morning with a customer that got a 500 megawatt site they want to build. And we're actually in dual service territory. So we have the opportunity to go with a deregulated supplier or a regulated supplier. And so we're kind of having conversations with both. And it's interesting. Like you talk to some of these rural cooperatives and you call them up and you're like, hey, we're looking at 500 megawatts of power. And it's like,
Yeah, that's not their MO. Yeah.
Well, and they probably have a 600 megawatt grid right now with like 4,000 customers.
Yeah.
So you're talking about doubling their load, and especially if that. So usually the co-ops have a transmission distribution or a transmission generation entity above them that they have to coordinate with, and then figuring out line sizes, and then also like in a deregulated market, oftentimes the transmission lines themselves are either investor owned or they're owned by one of the utilities, but they're open access like interstate pipelines are. And so then you've got to do a whole grid, coordination study. And the thing too is, and we're working on a project in the Southeast right now where, we're getting like 60 megawatts of bridging power at 100 kV, and then we're looking at 500 at 230 kV. Well, when you moved the 230 kV, on the 100 kV system, like I'm affecting some stuff in that local area and some other industrials and some substations down the line. Once you get above 230, you're now affecting stuff a state away. And so there's massive interconnection studies. And the biggest challenge I think a lot of the utilities, especially the bigger ones, are dealing with right now is they got 30 people coming to them asking for a gig.
Yeah.
And they don't know how much of it's real. I mean, in Texas, they've set up a whole nother path for crypto guys of like, you're going to pay for everything up front.
Advance, yeah.
And then we'll talk about it. Where, the traditional process is there's a bunch of work the utility will do for free.
Yeah.
And then tell you what they think is available. But the problem is they're just getting hit. And we saw this, this isn't, the scale of it, or the magnitude, I should say, is larger, but we've been dealing with this in the oil field for almost a decade.
So how much, like for a decade, so the oil field was the first really heavy adopter of this application
of electricity, yes,
as a primary out
of moving every. Well, they had so much, and a lot of it's from an emissions perspective. But I mean, if you looked at it before, everything from pumps to pump jacks to drilling rigs to frac fleets, all of this ran on diesel. Right?
Oh, yeah.
And so, and also the speed and velocity of everything is changing. I mean, back in the day, you used to plant a garden at a drilling rig because you're going to be there for a while. I mean, they're drilling in like a week and a half. And they can now hit a mailbox that's, 2 miles away.
Really?
And so everything now has been going to highline power, really started with electronic submersible pumps, going away from just the traditional pump jack because they can get so much more out of the ground faster. But all of that's electric. And so the grid in West Texas specifically, and a bunch of these other shale play markets have been dealing with this, transmission constraints. And there's a ton of on-site generation that's been brought out there. One of the big moves we saw probably 5 years ago was starting to use field gas.
What's that?
So gas that's in a pipeline has to be in a very tight spec because you have no idea whether that's going to a power plant or somebody's stove. Mm-hmm. And so when gas comes out of the ground, it still has all sorts of liquids. There's a whole bunch of stuff in it.
It's going to be refined or processed.
But you're sitting right there and you got an unlimited fuel source, so you want to be able to use it, which is another big difference between reciprocating engines and turbines. A turbine is not nearly as BTU sensitive as an engine is. It just wants to have it all in the same physical state. And so a lot of these generation companies popped up of mobile generation, and now they're
everywhere.
It's crazy.
We see a ton of them. We get asked to partner with a lot of those little groups because there's so much market share out there.
When you had stranded, I need 5 megs of power, I need 30 megs of power. And a lot of these guys have been building their own literally distribution grids that go out for miles for a long time because they didn't want to wait on the utility to build all that stuff. So all that's private and they're running all their medium voltage, and then they'll have a single connection somewhere. And so you might be waiting 3 years for that connection. So they'll bring in mobile gen, which is something we're now kind of bringing that to the data center space.
Yeah.
But this is the same problem. It's just the magnitude. They were looking for 50 megs and now data centers are looking for 500.
Yeah.
And that kind of totally changes the game, when you're talking about generation and how do you want to lay that out, right? And there's the Title V and emissions issues. There's all sorts of other complexities. And then what is that going to look like tying into that local grid? And like you said before, at the end of the day, data centers, especially anything over 500 megawatts, has to start figuring out how to come to the grid as a net asset.
Yeah.
And not, I want 1,500 megs of power here. And it's like, okay, well, who's going to go build a power plant?
How we're staring down the barrel of a demand that's almost untenable based on the current solutions that we offer for power, which is why we're seeing a big scramble. Like I'm reading all these things right now. Everyone's going towards natural gas because renewables are hard to have storage capacity. I mean, it's great windy days and sunny days, but you can't count on them. You can't depend on them, especially in a mission critical environment. So, but is it tier 5 or class 5? What's the class 5 limitation to
Title 5?
Title 5, that's it. So Title 5 basically says you can go up to 100, 150 megawatts in one campus before they cap based on emissions.
Yeah. It's basically the emissions that would govern a normal power plant development. And so, and that's the challenge, right? Is energy density is all that matters. And everybody's really starting to figure that out. And you're even seeing, I mean, kind of the interesting analogy is if you look at how many, kW you got in Iraq 10 years ago versus what people are talking about now. I mean, I'm hearing 200 kW in Iraq. Like that's mind-numbing.
I've had people on this podcast talk about it. I don't know if we're quite there yet. It's cold plate to the, right to the chip type of thing. But I think that there's a lot of mechanical permutations that we're iterating through right now to get those densities higher. I think that you're running around 450 to 500 watts per square foot. So guys are probably running between 50 to 75 kW per rack right now, and they're staring down the barrel of 100, and they're trying to get you to 200. So we're not there, but we're going to be bringing on the guests that continue to talk about how they're advancing that, because we're running out of, we want to maximize our footprint or topology and where we put these things, and the density is getting higher. So it means we need less space. We just need more power.
Right.
And like I was asking some engine guys when I was at the Genbacher conference, I'm like, can I make an entire engine yard and just stack these things?
Yeah.
And they're like, no, there's limitations to what you could do with that too.
Because of emissions.
Yeah. So like there's natural gas. The reason why I want to have this conversation is everyone thinks that this is the answer. And I think it's the temporary answer. It's the bridging answer to a long-term solution that has to exist. Yep. You agree?
I do.
So
it's because density is all that matters. But you're also, the challenge with wind and solar is it's not dense and it's intermittent, right? So it needs a huge amount of land area. And then you have intermittency. Solar is relatively predictable depending on where you put it.
Like in Arizona.
Right. Yeah. But, wind is not. And wind on the coast has a higher capacity factor than wind inland. But both of those are intermittent sources, and they can't really do reg up and reg down some of the other things that a mechanical generator can do.
So how do you use that when you're hedging against natural gas and coal, when you're trying to go to your clients that are asking on the commercial or the industrial side, where do I get my power at? And you're, like you said, you're trying to find ways to allow them to have a transparent and predictable power solution, but the power rates that they're going to fluctuate through change, in multiple different iterations. Like during the day, you said it's 9 to 9 for gas, but it's midnight to midnight, right? For power, for electricity, right? So how are you doing that? Because I know I stopped you at your first one where you're like, I'm an advisor to power, and I wanted to double tap on that one. But what are the other two things you do as a business?
So we've built a whole technology stack from the ground up to really help customers understand how they're using power in real time.
So they're studying it?
Well, all the way down to, like, we have a lobster plant in Maine. We literally show them the energy intensity, cost, and carbon footprint per pound of product they produced in those 5 minutes.
Oh, wow.
And so, all the stuff that people are trying to do with emissions tracking, all that becomes automated, but you're now actually getting actionable data, and it's information. It's not just data. And so we've built that platform all the way from the ground up, and you could track every electron in a data center. And one of the things we're talking to a number of people about is actually doing PUE in real time, and PUE all the way down to the rack. And so we have huge office buildings, a couple million square feet, and every tenant in that building can see their energy intensity per square foot every 5 minutes, and all their carbon emissions, all that stuff's totally automated. And then it all produces all their bills based on what actually happened in the market. All in a single ecosystem. And that's the whole point of it. In fact, we're rolling out a device, I've got it here actually, but that literally from the point of IO where that data is created, whether that's a power meter, a steam meter, gas meter, water meter, whatever, all the way to the front end, billing, alerts, alarms, reporting, it's all one totally encrypted ecosystem.
Really?
And that's, at the end of the day, and this is kind of the macro challenge, right, is until you actually understand and manage energy in real time in an energy market that's in real time, that's trading, $1 billion a day when you think about physical and financial energy markets. All of that is moving in real time. So until load actually understands how all this functions and starts managing this in real time, the energy transition is just talk, right? You just can't do it because everybody right now, majority of customers are using, long-term fixed price contracts and saying, I just don't want to pay attention to that. I don't want to manage that. Well, when you start getting into the 500 megawatt and
you have to pay attention to that because that's a big rounding error.
A huge rounding error.
Yeah.
And industrial customers have been doing this for a long time. We have customers literally, we reproduce their budget every day based on how much the product they produced and what went on in power and gas markets that day, because that impacted the cost of that product that they're selling to their customer. And there's some industries out there like glass, 80% of a glass bottle is energy, right? So I've even seen places where in that industry, their customer contracts are based on energy, right? Well, data centers have been doing this forever, but they're selling it on a KW basis and some kind of fixed price that isn't, really tracking with markets. And that's where the whole data center space has got to kind of get with the game, especially with the size that we're moving to now, as you're now moving into full-on heavy industrial scale. And you've got to be able to manage that, track it. And so then in between that, we have an infrastructure service. And like I said, for 10 years now, we've been doing this in the oil field space, building one customer, we built 14 miles of 138 private transmission, 2 substations, tapping interstate pipelines. I think the longest pipeline we've run is about 16 miles. Right of way there can be a real challenge. But both of those things are going to impact each other. And a lot of times too, on industrial sites, especially if something is remote, like we had a site where we built the gas infrastructure to 30 megawatts of temporary gen while we built out the transmission system to actually get to the plant and get it online. And so, this is stuff we've been doing for a decade. It's just the scale's changing, but that's just numbers.
And you were really doing it for a different vertical, right? Now Totally. You're doing it for, I believe this is, and you and I had this conversation in Miami where, the first utility they say was plumbing, and the second was electricity, the third was gas, and the fourth was connectivity. And I challenge everyone to say, if you add those 4 utilities together, you make the 5th utility, which is a data center. I think a data center itself is now just its own standalone utility.
Data is a utility.
Well, we are in a digital economy. Data is the most valuable commodity in the world now. And I think that what you're going to see is people looking at, I think that we're growing more aware as consumers. Like, we understand the cloud is a very prevalent term and AI is a very prevalent term. And those are the things that we see above the waterline. People don't understand what's really happening below that. And that represents a larger part of the action. And that below the waterline part now is what we're trying to deconstruct. We're trying to make that a little bit more visible, because I think consumers too are understanding, if you're tracking a lobster manufacturer in Maine that can tell you what the carbon footprint is per lobster, like, imagine what we're doing per download, and we're getting there. I mean,
and all that can go downstream to their customers, right? Yeah. So all this, emissions tracking and everything through the entire supply chain. And I think that's too, like, people think of, first off, people think of energy consumers and producers, right? Which is a total violation of the first law of thermodynamics. It's not real, right? So everybody thinks of an oil and gas producer or a wind turbine or whatever as producing energy, and then it just moves its way down the chain. But if you actually look what's happening, it's just a circle, right? Oil and gas producers are some of the biggest energy consumers out there, but they're taking one form of energy and making it into more useful, which is no different than our, kind of whole evolution from wood to coal to, lasers, right? Yeah. So it's all about making energy more and more and more dense and making it more and more useful, which is the exact same thing that's happening in data centers, right? Is you're trying to get more and more and more power into that rack.
Right.
And I think that's one of the kind of macro, going back to thermodynamics, nerdy parts of this whole thing, is if you think about a power plant and you're going to build it right next to a data center, but that power plant still has a huge inefficiency of heat that it has to get rid of through cooling towers or whatever. And then I'm going to move the power that I do produce over to this data center,
which generates heat over there.
And I'm going to generate a bunch of, and so when you start thinking about the scale of what you're talking about, if you need a gigawatt of power, which means you're going to have more than a gigawatt of thermal energy that went into this power plant, and then I'm going to basically take all of that electricity and turn it straight into heat. You have, gigawatts of low value heat. And I think that's one of the things that's got to get figured out.
How do we use it?
Yeah.
Repurpose that?
It's just a massive amount of waste.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what the applications are for that yet. And I don't know if it's something that I'm going to peel back or scratch the paint on, because I don't know how that brings value to the industry. That's still just, you can't get ahead.
We tried to use it in like greenhouses and stuff. But
does it not pencil?
No. Well, you have to have such huge infrastructure to move, because it's low grade heat. This is why everyone wants high grade heat or electricity.
Yeah.
And so that, obviously a challenge for another day, but
think about it. We're also talking about, like, if you're using reciprocating engines, which tend to be probably the most reliable for a data center.
And more electrically efficient, which is important.
Yeah, because for the demand response, it's mainly about frequency response, right? So, and I want you to unpackage that entire model so other people understand what that model looks like, because there are groups that are like, yeah, we want to do it because there's all kinds of checks we're going to get back. I'm like, you need to understand how complicated and what it's not like you just get a check for being in the club. Like, you're going to have to be ready.
You get your face ripped off if you do it wrong.
Exactly. So I want you to put a pin in that and make sure you unpackage that, because assume that the people that are listening, like, look, I talked to you about, like, I know our ecosystem of our industry, right? Our industry is pretty simple. You have operators and you have enterprise end users, and they make purchasing decisions. And what happens is they normally go and they find someone as a consultant to make a business case to justify deploying a lot of capital into an asset.
Right.
And then someone says, based on this is going to be the basis of design that we need, right? So we need this many volumes of power or megawatts or space power. Like, I need this many acres so I could have this much square foot of land, or for what I do for my buildings. But someone has to design that, like the architects and the engineers, the MEP partners. And there's groups that just specialize only on the MEP. They don't even touch the architect, because in a data center, you don't care how pretty a data center is. It's almost offensive.
Work.
Yeah, because you're charging someone for that price per kW. It all came back. So if I walk into a data center and it's really nice, I'm like, somebody's paying for this, right? But the reality is you don't waste a lot of money on what looks good in a data center. So it's always a little a, big E, where typically you have an architect that's designing something that's and I'm not trivializing the architects, but once you have a design, then you have to go to a build. And there's general contractors and construction managers that manage those builds, but the trades are who perform the labor. They're the craftsmen, the people that use their hands. So that is a huge part of the ecosystem. And then you have to commission this thing. So that's another part of the ecosystem of a specialty service before you operate it, right? But if I were to, like, talk about the 5 phases of our life cycle, that's the ecosystem, right? So people know, like, I'm on, if I'm not on the design side with an architect and engineer, I'm on the delivery side from a GC or a CM, or I'm in the trades performing the labors, or I'm a manufacturer of equipment like generators or UPS systems, et cetera, or I'm a manufacturer's rep for them, right? And then you are any other services that come along, right? You could just package all that stuff up, but you're on the equipment side, the services side, or the design side. In your ecosystem, like, there's people refer to me, like, when I was at that conference, the power conference, Inio Jenbacher, I was learning the ecosystem. People were like, well, there's midstream, and there's upstream, and there's downstream, and there's all these other things. And I'm like, man, there's a lot of shit we need to understand. Can you break down that ecosystem a little bit for some of us listeners?
When you say
people come to you, who comes to you? Is it an operator? Is it an enterprise end user? Is arbitrarily
so what's interesting right now, which has changed, because typically it was the folks that are going to build a data center, right?
So that's who you were engaging with first.
Prior.
The owner operators.
Right. And now it's actually moved to kind of how we deal with industrial customers. So a lot of times it's actually starting out with, hey, I need to build something, and here's the 5 places I can build it. What does power and gas look like infrastructure-wise and market-wise in each of these? And we would actually help them narrow down which site. And then once we choose the site, then we're working with the utilities to get all the interconnections done. We're working with the engineers to draw out how, where do we want the substation set? How do we want it configured? What does that look like? How is that going to tie in? And then move all the way through construction, commissioning, and then we're managing the risk ongoing in markets in real time. So that was kind of the life cycle for us on the industrial side. And the same thing's now happening on the data center side, where we're walking straight from, hey, we're trying to look at these 5 sites, which one's the one that's going to make the most sense, all the way through, getting it online and managing in the market. What's interesting, though, is we're now getting approached by everybody. So land bank people that have just been buying land. Hey, I've got transmission lines here. What can I do with this?
Yeah.
Does this make sense? There's a gas pipeline here. Okay, well, that one's not any good, but this one 6 miles away might be. And then we have the, actual people that want to build data centers who are the traditional ones that were talking to us. And then we have, now industrial portfolios that we manage that are sitting here going, hey, I've got these sites that have transmission power that we're either thinking about shutting down or are shutting down. Could we turn these into,
them?
Yeah, turn these into data centers? And then, industrial sites that just have a whole bunch of land near an existing substation. Can we do something with this? Should we even shut this business down?
Yeah.
Which is kind of like, holy cow, are you serious? But when you start looking at what this land is selling for, it's totally wild. And that's, and obviously I'm not on the brokerage side, but I mean, when you start talking about $1 million an acre,
Virginia's a couple.
Yeah, it's
so
crazy.
Yeah, it is bananas, but it's a rounding error in comparison to what's going to go into
and
that.
That's what's shifted too, right? So if you think about the other thing that we've kind of seen as a real paradigm shift is there was so much back in the 50 megawatt, 100 megawatt or less data centers. What does power cost? Mm-hmm. That's starting to take a back seat just because the cost of these servers
is the volume and velocity. How much can I get?
Exploded. It's totally exploded. And so that's going to be the interesting thing too is, and I've kind of, I don't own any Bitcoin. I don't know what Bitcoin's worth, but I know it's not worth $65,000, right?
Yeah.
Like it's either worth nothing or it's worth like $1 million.
Yeah.
And right now, we have Bitcoin operators that are making more money off of the grid than they are off of Bitcoin in certain markets. And we work with a bunch of them and helping them. Same thing we're doing in data center space. This is a different type of data center. But right now, they're very actively participating in a lot of these markets because that has more value than Bitcoin and it's cash today. If Bitcoin goes up $500,000, everything changes. They're going to wreck the grid, right? Because they're going to keep running. I don't care what the power price is. If I'm going to get this Bitcoin, it's worth $500,000.
Yeah,
I'll pay
it's worth it.
$50,000 for energy for this hour. And so that's the same thing's going to happen with the data centers, right? Is if you have to be online and you're not coming as a net asset to the grid, that's going to create a lot of problems. And so when you look at the sheer across like 8 projects we're working on right now, it's several gigawatts of power that we're working on in a whole bunch of different markets. When you start thinking about like the impact, and the impact that you have as a user, and this is in spaces, and this is kind of the benefit of the experience that we've had for a long time, is like if you look at an arc furnace in steel. Right? Those guys have been interacting very actively with the power market forever, right? Even some of these, Alcoa and some of these other plants that either built generation on site or again, very actively participated in markets because they can turn on and turn off relatively quickly. And they have a load that moves the whole grid. And so, this is especially when you're dealing with these co-ops and you tell them, hey, I know you're a 1,200 megawatt co-op and I want to put a gig on your system. And they're like,
no, thanks.
Oh, and sometimes they will say no thanks. And sometimes it's like, well, listen, we don't have anything over 69 kV in our system. It's like, all right, I'm not going to rebuild your system. This isn't going to work. We're going to go look somewhere else. But, there are others that, hey, we've got 345 lines or we have access to these open access lines. And absolutely. And now you're having a whole different conversation. This is where kind of the experience of negotiating with utilities. We've had utilities in the past. I had a gas utility that, we had an industrial site we were putting in and they said, we don't negotiate. Like, okay, well, we'll just build a pipeline around you. And they said, yeah, sure you will. And we put the whole project together and all of a sudden we've negotiated from 70 cents down to 14 on a 10-year contract with a regulated utility. So understanding how their world works. And I think too, this is kind of one of the areas that we've seen people kind of get into a mess with the utilities as they kind of, don't understand their world and just kind of go in there like a bull in a china shop and everything's a mess. And so being able to go to them and say, listen, I understand what I'm asking for and I understand the magnitude of what that's doing on your side of the table. And on its face, this doesn't look possible, but what if we did this? And a lot of times like, oh, yeah, no, actually we can make that work. In fact, we had an oil and gas customer that we have a whole bunch of stuff running on gas gens and we want to get onto the power grid, but there's no power, firm on the transmission system. And so we went to the utility and said, listen, what percentage of the time do you actually have the power? And they said, probably about 92, 94% of the time. I said, all right, listen, let's take this transmission line and turn it into interruptible. and you tell us when you need us to roll back to our gas gens. But now we've taken all of that power off gas gen for 90% of the time. Utilities can do the same thing, right? And if you're coming either with a significant volume of backup gen, which is a whole nother, like the whole diesel backup gen for 500 megawatts. That's a whole nother
thing that I'm trying to unpackage too. Why would I have it?
It's crazy.
Yeah.
And it was, again, it's all about scale, right? That was fine at 5 megawatts. It was fine at 50 megawatts. It might have been fine at 100.
You can't do that with diesel.
Right. But you're not doing 500 megawatts of diesel gen. Like that's just, it's a fuel nightmare. It's a stabilization nightmare. It's an emissions nightmare. It's just a mess. And so, another massive metamorphosis is you're now seeing data centers that wanted nothing to do with a gas pipeline saying, is there one close by?
Yeah.
Because that's
a big factor now.
Right. And that has a whole nother complexity. I don't feel like people in the data center space understand gas and how those markets work.
Can I'm going to jump all over the place.
Yeah, it's fine.
Right? Are you cool with that? So, can I scratch the paint on natural gas's capabilities and limitations? All right. Yeah. So like, I know there's a Title V, right, that says you can only, there's a capacity limit what you get into until you start triggering something else. But what are, like, I sat in the back of that conference with you and we were listening to all kinds of panels, and there were things that were being said where I'm like, I agree with some of that. Sometimes I was like, that's outdated. That information's a year or two old. Or some things that were just, I don't know if they've seen the ball since kickoff. And I'm not picking on any of the speakers there.
I love that phrase.
You know what I'm saying? But there are different people that were talking about different things. And I'm like, wow. And I, when it was coming into your world, I would look at you and like, is that true? Is that true? Because I could understand how to handicap them off the other things they were saying. Because some of the other things they were saying, I wouldn't say were wrong. Right. I would just say that they were using outdated information to articulate what that construct looked like. And it's okay, because there's nothing static in this industry. There's nothing static in yours. There's nothing static in ours. So just as you feel like you got your shit figured out and you understand this space, tomorrow something else is going to change. It's significant, and we're going to have to go reinvent ourselves and then relearn what that means.
Totally.
For me, one of the guys sitting in the back room was like, well, let me and I had heard a rumor, and you tell me if this is true, and it was actually mentioned it was a question to one of the speakers at that conference. And they're like, yeah, if you look at the way the natural gas is looked at from whoever the providers are, and you're going to help us understand that, there's like a tier level in which people that need that power coming from natural gas, there's almost priority given to like hospitals, residential, things of that nature, military bases maybe. But then the last people they're going to give a shit about are the data center owner operators, because they're commercial or industrial. And is there truth to that? That there's like a cascading?
Yeah, it's an order. So it's the curtailment order.
Okay, what is it?
Curtailment order. So that's when they start curtailing. So I think one of the most important things that people need to understand between power and gas, right, is they're obviously very different. Electricity is literally the most inelastic commodity on Earth. It can't be stored, right? Yeah. A battery doesn't store electricity. Like most people think it does. It takes energy in the form of electricity,
it to DC.
Turns it into chemical energy, potential energy,
and then reconverts,
and then brings it back, right? So power is just going to flow, and it's going to flow to the path of least resistance. And so in real time, every several seconds, whatever grid operator you're dealing with is managing what
rectifying and converting power.
Exactly. And we have customers that, like in certain markets participate in responsive reserve, where you'll have what's called an under frequency relay on your load. And basically the power grid's always trying to stay exactly at 60 hertz. 59.7, things start going bad, right? And 60.03, things start going bad. So literally that under frequency relay is reading in like 10 cycles, and there's 60 cycles in a second. 10 cycles, your load's gone. And it's basically circuit breakers if the frequency starts to degrade.
If there's lag or lead, they just start opening up and load?
Yeah, well, really it's lag. Because they can't do, you're going to have a generator drag on the grid if you're leading, which is another, thing. But basically they're circuit breakers. Those loads are just going to trip off to try to get that frequency back up, and they're going to drop off automatically where that frequency is falling.
Interesting.
So because they're at their local meter watching that frequency, and if it hits that, and there's actually two settings. So the faster it falls, the faster it'll trip. So if it sees like 59.5 for like 4 cycles, you're gone, right? Because it knows something's going south too fast. And so the grid will set what those settings are.
Yeah.
And then you're getting paid a capacity payment effectively to do that. And one of the weird things about Uri was people didn't realize that you were actually losing money while you were curtailed and making when you weren't. And so things got like tens of millions of dollars sideways during Uri with how DR was called and all that mess.
So I heard during that time, and what people maybe they don't remember, it was the superstorm of Texas that shut down and froze everything. And it shut down the whole state. No airports were open, remember? I was stranded actually in another state, couldn't get back for like 5 days.
Okay.
But what was happening at that point was those people that owned their engines were able to turn them on in response to the grid demand, and they were making money moving the needle to the left, right? It was like $9 million a megawatt hour or something like that. I was told.
Yeah, so it was $9 a kilowatt hour,
okay,
or $9,000 a megawatt hour, and Texas has adjusted the grid down to 5 is the market cap now,
okay,
which is up from 3. But yeah, so there was a silly amount of money that transpired, and gas went berserk. So I mean, you had a major pipeline company that was making $1 billion a day pulling gas out of storage and putting it in the system. And so this kind of goes back to our gas market discussion. So you had what you had was major freeze offs in the oil field. So in Texas, it doesn't get cold like that very often, and it never gets cold like that in Houston.
Sure.
And so because out of a gas well, there's water and all these other, things
elements
coming up that you're separating the surface. So when it gets really cold like that, it'll actually become an ice plug and stop.
Is that what was happening?
Right. So you get these, it's called a freeze off. And you don't have this nearly as much in North Dakota because they're prepared for it. Everything's heat traced. But in West Texas, that you don't need it that often. So it's a really expensive thing to maintain.
Yeah.
And so across the western part of the state in that gas grid, you started to see gas pressures drop because not as much gas was going into the system. And so this is a major separator between power and gas, is that gas is a physical molecule that you as the transporter move from here to there, and it's all what pipes it went through and how is it getting cashed out along the way. And it's depending on the size of the load, the gas is either balanced hourly, daily, or monthly, or all three, depending on where you are. And there's some safe harbor limits. Power is monitored and managed every several seconds on a grid frequency basis, and then the power price is changing constantly. So gas, you're trading for a gas day, which closes at 9, and then there's the cash market, which is shorter term than that. And so what was happening is you had all these freeze-offs where gas just wasn't showing up anymore to processing plants. And so now you have a gas ration. And so what happens is it's called an operational flow order. And basically that pipeline has a pressure, right? And, at some point it'll burst. And so, engineering factors of safety, you never even get remotely close to something bursting, but every pipe has what's called a MAOP, or maximum operating pressure. And for most pipelines in the US, it's around 700 PSI. There's some as high as 1400. There's some as low as 100. But just to give you a kind of measure, the gas coming to your house is like half a PSI.
Okay, so this is big time.
Like
pressure.
You open a valve, this will blow your hand off.
Yeah.
Pressure. And so what happens is though the pipeline's trying to maintain that pressure in a range. So if my MAOP is 700, most of the time I'm probably in the 500-ish range. And so if I start getting up into like 6 something, they're going, okay, wait a minute, we're getting a lot of gas in the system. And they'll call an OFO. And what they're, in that case, for overpressure is they're telling
relieve some.
Right. Well, they're telling the people that are putting gas into the system, you can only put in as much as you've nominated. And for the users, you need to pull everything off the pipe that you're pulling. And as a user, if you pull too much, that's fine. As a producer, if you put too much in, you're getting penalized. And the penalties are punitive. More often, what's happening is the pressure is actually dropping. And now, especially in the winter, we're worried about getting gas to grandma's house so that, her furnace keeps running. And so the producers can put in as much as they want, and all of these industrial customers can only pull what their nominations are. And the penalties, again, if you pull too hard as an industrial customer, is punitive. You may be paying $3 for gas, but you're going to pay a $100 penalty per decatherm if you pull too much. Well, what can happen is you get into a situation like Uri, there's just not enough gas coming into the system. And so now I have to start curtailing people. I don't even care if you have the nominations and capacity. I'm starting to curtail people. And so similar to the power grid, like a utility, they've broken their grid up into like 100 zones effectively. And when the grid calls and says, I need you to curtail power, okay, you can click off 95 through 100.
Yeah.
Right. And they'll click off through that order until you get down to like, number 1 through 50 are hospitals, military bases, fire stations, that kind of stuff. That they just we're not clicking that off. And so that's where you had those rolling blackouts as they'd turn a section off, turn it back on, and they were rotating through the utilities. So the same thing happens in gas. And traditionally, the first people to get cut are industrials. I don't care what product you're making, you're not making it anymore. And then usually after that would have been power plants. And then it would have been like commercial, retail stores and kind of light commercial, and then residential, right? So residential is the last thing to get cut. And so what actually happened in the middle of Uri was they changed the order of the order. And a whole bunch of gas companies, and there's a big difference in inter and intrastate pipes. We can go into that in a second.
Yeah,
basically, an interstate pipe is a pipe that crosses the state line. Intra doesn't.
One's federally managed, probably the other one's managed at the state level.
Exactly. And so the rules and regulations on them are very different. Well, so what happened was during Uri, because gas prices exploded, and what was the interesting things is ICE actually only had 3 digits on their platform for gas trading. So gas traded to $999.
If you could go above that because they didn't have enough spinners.
Right. So, but there was voice brokering that went all the way to like $1,250.
Wow.
And there was I think it was in Illinois. It was a fertilizer plant that made like $75 million in a day.
Just because they had so much stored in the reserves?
Well, they just liquidated their gas back into the market. Like we had customers in Texas where we bought gas for $3 and, we're on the phone with banks on Sunday trading it for $400.
There's a lot of people that had storage of gas,
right?
Making money, huh?
100%. And at the end of the day, what you're doing as an industrial is putting that gas back into the system so it can make it to a house. And so what happened was in the middle of that storm, because of the power rollout or blackouts, they moved power plants right behind residential. So we're changing the order of curtailment. Power plants are now right behind residential because we need power.
Oh, wow.
Well, so the utilities sent that out as an order to curtail, which it wasn't. And so what was really interesting is we saw in the middle of that, and it was wild for that whole week of everything that was going on. Oh my gosh. They were breaking rules all over. Like demand response is only supposed to get called for 24 hours. They got called for 5 days. Wow. The market cap, there was a peak net peaker margin that would stop and mechanically move the price cap back down. And they were like, nope, we're not doing that. Keep it at $9,000. And so there were all of these things that were kind of changing on the fly and breaking, and people hadn't done that math ever because no one thought that some of these components in the market that you thought had a 9,000 cap ended up trading at $26,000. So billions of dollars were moving around every single day in those 5 days while everybody's trying to figure out what's going on. And the other thing that was happening too is, power plants need to come back online and show that they're stable for like 24 hours before they'll put them back to the bid stack. And so, you saw these huge reserve margins, which is driving everybody crazy, like get that back online, but, they weren't ready yet. And so there were all of these shifts happening in the market where, an intrastate pipe, for example, like we had a customer that the intrastate pipe said, listen, here's the order and you need to curtail. And we're going, that's an order of an order. They just changed the order, but they're not actually calling the curtailment. But the problem is if you're a rural industrial and you're being served by that regional gas company that's already clearly having problems and you decide to run, and they have problems,
then the residential will suffer too.
Well, and it's all going to get blamed on you.
Yeah.
Right. Even if it's not your problem. So in a lot of cases, we made the decision, like we're just curtailing customers. And it was also huge to have real-time data during that period because we had a customer that said they wanted to sell their power back and we'd already sold the gas. And we went online, the platform, one of their plants was shut down. The other was still running. And headquarters in Dallas didn't know. And so we called them up. I was like, hey, we can't, if we liquidate this right now, you're going to lose millions of dollars. And they were like, no, it's down. We're like, no, I'm watching it. 5 minutes ago, it was still up. And they called out and the guys were still running pumps and stuff to try to keep stuff from freezing. They weren't going to shut down.
Oh, wow.
And so that, when you really start interacting with real-time markets, and these are events that, obviously Uri was a big anomaly, but these kind of events happen every year. We we see OFO situations, we see constrained operating conditions, and also with what's going on with how some of these power markets work, we'll see power prices in a market go, in Texas, for example, go from 5 cents to $2.50 in 15 minutes. So if you're not actually paying attention to that and understand how your hedges and that kind of stuff work, either you're paying a massive premium to just
have a guaranteed volume of whatever you need.
And use power like a drunk sailor. No.
Yeah, you're looking right at me.
Or you're getting your face ripped off because you weren't paying attention, or you're making a whole bunch of money.
Is that what people pay you guys to do primarily, is to manage all that data?
Understand how you're interacting with the market and how to do that better. And it's been really cool, over the course of my career to watch industrials that were typically just doing 3-year fixed price contracts really start to understand the nuances of the market and start making millions of dollars a year that they were just giving away before. And I'm starting to see that shift somewhat in the data center space. But
I imagine it's going to be a huge shift in the data center space. These companies are going to have to hire or get more sophisticated on the way that they go procure power.
Totally.
It's not a part anymore like that's a utility problem. Now it's like it's theirs and it's a part of their business matrix where they have to figure it out and how to make a pencil with it, right?
Well, and this is the complexity of the whole using gas in data centers is that pipeline. So you have a capacity. So there's 2 types of service. And I actually got into a $3 million lawsuit on behalf of a customer over the definition of the word firm with a major oil and gas company that you've heard of.
Okay.
But effectively in gas, you have firm and interruptible transport. And so as an industrial, you can pay a discount as an industrial.
The opposite.
Right. So you can get interruptible service as an industrial, and effectively you're going to pay a lower rate, but the utility has the right to call up and say, hey, you need to shut off in 2 hours or tomorrow. And so we have a lot of customers, not a lot, but we have a number of customers that have either big propane backup on site that they can run, like we have a big glass plant that, they haven't shut down in 10 years. So they have to have propane to back that up. Or other customers that their process isn't that critical. And so they would rather save the money. And if they need to shut down for an afternoon or a day, it's just not that big of a deal. And so that's an interruptible customer. And then firm.
And they pay concessions on their price.
They get a cheaper.
And they get told what do they get as a benefit? If they're being told, I need you to drop your load to the grid right now, what are they gaining from that?
They're not paying as high an actual monthly cost.
Okay. So they're just being courtesy warned before the price demand spikes to drop your shit.
Right. And effectively, and just round numbers, but let's just say that firm capacity on that pipe costs $10 and you're going to pay $7. Mm-hmm. But I can call you whenever I want and tell you need to turn off. And so you decide, okay, was that $3 delta? And those aren't actual real numbers, but just for example's sake. And so that's kind of the difference. Where if you buy firm, then you think about a pipeline like a pie, right? So you own a percentage of the throughput of that line that you've paid for, and you pay for that as a reservation charge every month, whether you use it or not. And then you'll actually pay another charge on throughput of what you actually move through there. Plus there's a fuel charge that's on there. And then you're paying the supplier that's actually putting the gas in the pipe and then bringing it to you. And so that whole nominations and balancing is a big thing we do for a lot of customers. So if I'm a data center, and this is kind of the conversation we were having in the back of the room the other day, if I'm not a firm customer, but I'm just going to use gas as a backup fuel. So I don't want to pay the firm rate because that's really expensive and I only need this like 3 days a year. Then I want to pay the interruptible rate to be able to just get gas and use it when I want, which is orders of magnitude cheaper. The problem is the reality of you losing power and the gas grid being in an OFO situation is high. So now you may not be able to get gas, period, because an interruptible customer is interrupted, so there is no gas. Or if you can, you're now buying it in the spot market, which is going to be a problem anyway, even if you have firm capacity where, gas might be $100 a decatherm. So now you look at what your heat rate is and what the cost of that is. There's a whole lot of complexity to just going to the gas market. And I think this is where you're going to see, this is kind of another ancillary benefit of prime power, is now I can actually budget and manage gas as part of my fuel mix. And I really understand what my heat rate is to my data center. And, there's a whole bunch of guys in this game now that are wanting to be the ones that build, own, and operate that power plant next door or on site. And effectively, they're going to sell, a PPA rate, heat rate to the data center, and then they're going to participate in the much more valuable,
which is on
ancillary
demand
market, to the grid. And now you're coming to that local co-op or whoever, and a lot of those guys really got hurt in Uri because either they were dependent on physical gen that went down, or they weren't hedged in the market right. There's a bunch of other challenges. And so this is the opportunity. If you really understand power markets and you understand the power infrastructure and how those things are going to work with the gas grid and gas infrastructure, it totally changes the way that the dynamics of a data center can really become a net benefit to wherever they're.
Have you seen success with that? You've been doing some data center work. Have you seen data center operators change the way they engage with you over the last few years?
Oh, yeah.
In what way?
Well, the way that what people are talking about and willing to kind of accept is radically shifted. And a lot of that's based on power, but a lot of that's still in this, 100 to 300 megawatt range.
Which is still big, but now it's not even, it's crazy that we're not considering that big, but it's still monstrous.
Yeah, it's huge. Yeah. And but this kind of next phase that's coming.
Yeah.
Of the 500 megawatt plus stuff that we're working on, it's a totally different ballgame. And it's a ballgame that a lot of data center operators just haven't operated in before. And so there's, kind of this drinking from the fire hose. And quite frankly, like to us, the more educated the customer is, the better, which is the problem with the whole brokerage business. I mean, a lot of people have no idea what they're paying.
Yeah.
And that's part of that business that we're trying to destroy. But really, data center operators have got to get much more in tune with how both the gas and power markets work, as well as how the infrastructure works. And kind of like you said before, most people just kind of put all that off on the utility. They're going to get me power, and they're just, using their traditional negotiating method with the utility of, let's just kind of figure this out.
Want to buy a big PPA, and we're going to get a price point based on economy of scale or some volume that I'm going to get.
And so all that's changing and shifting. And I think too, you're going to see, because there's some real interesting nuances too when you show up into a regulated utility with power, of what they used to be willing to pay for it versus what they're going to be willing to pay for it now.
Is it higher?
Yeah, and they're going to have to get a lot more flexible. And that's something we've done for a long time of working with utilities in, the Southeast, for example, that just aren't flexible. This is the way it's always been done. And it's like, okay, well,
are they going to lose at some point? They're going to be overran if they're not changing, right?
Yeah, I mean, a utility has their basically guaranteed return, and that's something we deal with in pipelines a lot of times. There's actual true ups, and there'll be FERC cases that we've participated in of hey, this got over margin or under margin. So, but I think too, if you're a regulated utility and you have all of a sudden this flood of data center requests, and you're trying to figure out how are you going to get the gen and the backbone transmission to be able to do it. And now you're going to have kind of several flavors of people showing up. The crypto guys, which you're probably going to be really leery of and kind of guard up. And then you're going to have the, several hundred megawatt folks. I'm going to try to figure out how to get this figured out. And then you're going to have this savvy group show up that says, hey, we're going to bring, 800 megawatts of data center, but we're going to put in 1,200 megawatts of gen. And the utility's going, okay, wait a minute. If I can work with you, maybe I can shift some of that gen over to this other data center that obviously is just showing up as a data center. Now you're coming to me as a net asset. And now I can get much more creative with what I can do with infrastructure wise. And I mean, we've negotiated custom tariffs and moved them confidentially through PUCs before in regulated states. So those things can happen if you understand how the dynamics of that market work and really understand the pain points from a market perspective as well as an infrastructure perspective, both from a regulated and deregulated utility. And so that's really where the shift is going to start to happen, is you're really going to start separating the data center operators and builders that are savvy and understand what's going on and the ones that are just kind of scrambling.
Yeah.
And obviously there's some, order of magnitude scale things that make those things different. But I wouldn't be shocked at all to start seeing, 250 megawatt data centers show up with, maybe 500 megawatts of load and splitting it off into a couple of parcels to deal with some of the Title V stuff, and now showing up as a net asset.
Is that the solution? Is you can beat the system by taking a larger parcel, putting it into as many sections as you want, and then figuring out how to...
There are ways to do that, but there are also some limitations to that. There's also a whole lot of stuff around how assets get socialized. So on the transmission system is
you mean like how they introduce it to the public to complain or to
no, like how costs are born. So a lot of times if you're a huge industrial load and you show up to, a 345 system, everything that's dedicated to you, you're probably going to pay for. Now in a distribution system, they have kayaks and they'll give you an allowance because some of that's going to be made up back through their rate case. And we've had situations with, several hundred megawatt loads that were 345 where, you had $50 million worth of infrastructure. But if you break the project up into totally separately owned, completely arm's length, nothing associated with each other, then some of that actually gets borne by the transmission system because it's multiple customers. Because if they go upgrade a big backbone transmission line for Houston, Texas, for example, right, that is benefiting a whole bunch of people across the system. And so those kind of things are what get put into socialized costs in regulated and deregulated markets, where that's borne by everybody because everybody's benefiting from a more robust grid. But if you show up and I want you to build me 100 miles of 345 kV that's just to me over here, well, that doesn't benefit anybody but you.
Right.
And so that's going to get borne by you. And there's a whole bunch of nuance within that of how to navigate that and what that looks like. And the same thing I think is true. And I'm not as much of an expert on the air permitting side, but from what I understand, a lot of it is actual parcel based, but also the EPA isn't interested in you playing games, right? So, if I have these 15 LLCs that they're all right next to each other, like
I figured that's why I'm like, it seems like that would be a way to beat the system, but it's unscalable probably to a certain point. What are some of the other limitations then? Something that was brought up was capacity is the biggest problem with natural gas. Capacity being there's not enough pipes. Storage isn't the problem, right? There's a ton of storage for natural gas.
There is, but again, it's physical constraint across the system of how to get it to certain places. And the other thing too is the gas grid, similar to the power grid, but and it's really interesting too. Like in Texas, if you look at the different zones in Texas, so Texas is broken up into 4 load zones. The generators are paid on nodes, which there's thousands of them, but if you look at the West zone versus the North, South, and Houston zones, you see a real seasonal curve from air conditioning.
Got it.
West Texas is flat. It's all oil and gas, right? And so it runs 24/7. There isn't really a seasonal curve to it like other parts of the country because they're pumping and moving and doing their. And there's also a boatload of Bitcoin. Into like 30% of the global hash rate went offline 2 Christmases ago when we had that cold weather.
Oh, really?
Because so much of that's acting on price response out there, which also, kind of flattens things out. So just like the power grid has times where it's really constrained and you get into those really tight operating conditions and everything that's online that can be online and, power prices are spiking, the same thing happens in the gas grid. And so especially during cold weather and especially toward the Northeast, you have a really high demand and constraint on the natural gas grid up there during those periods. And so that's when you can get into constrained situations. We have situations all the time in the production region in West Texas where gas prices can go negative.
Really?
There's just so much gas.
Wow, so much out there.
Well, if you think about it, in a lot of ways, gas is becoming a byproduct of oil production. So the fact that oil is at $80 and gas is coming up with it, fine, but let's just get rid of it. And so that is actually kind of one of the major drivers of depressing natural gas prices. And then there's also situations too, like especially in the Northeast and some of the dry areas, they'll drill a natural gas well, complete it, and then just sit there and wait. Then wait till colder weather,
necessary.
Right? And then they'll open it up because they a gas well produces an overwhelming majority of its production during the first 18 months. And so they'll actually, in some cases, shut them in, but you got to be really careful with that. But in some cases, they won't bring them into production until prices make sense and they can put it in the spot market. But again, it's a physical molecule, right? So if I want to move it from the Permian Basin in West Texas to Virginia or New York or wherever, I've got a whole system of pipes that I've got to get it, up there. And in the Southeast, and specifically in Texas, there are these huge salt dome storage. If you look at the Northeast, there's actually a huge volume of, really disparate LNG storage up there, because the pipeline systems are so constrained that they have that ready to go for the winter. And so they'll actually liquefy and put it into all these small LNG storages around the local utilities there, because in the winter, they're going to get more demand from houses than their pipes can handle.
Yeah.
And so they need to have something locally on their system that they can dump that into the system and provide the pressure that you need to get to everybody's houses. And so that's one of the challenges, and more pipelines are getting built to be able to move that natural gas around.
Are they being built like within certain states, or are they getting built to be able to cross from one state to the next?
But there are some that are being built from one state to the next. Primarily, I think a lot of the pipes right now are coming from West Texas to East to get into, some of the bigger, Sonat, Transco, TGP, some of the bigger pipelines. I imagine
those would be coming from the Dakotas, no?
Well, yeah, there's some, but the Dakotas is really heavy oil, where you're getting a lot more gas out of the Permian Basin, and then a lot out of the Marcellus up in Pennsylvania, Ohio.
Are those the two biggest ones in the United States?
There are others. The interesting thing is it's all about economics. And in basins, part of the reason that the Permian is doing so well is gas is a byproduct of oil. So if I'm making a whole bunch of money on oil, I'm producing gas as a byproduct, which is why you see it actually, go negative. Where in the Northeast, in fact, there's some places in the Marcellus where the gas is almost pipeline quality coming out of the ground.
Interesting.
It's very, very dry gas, where, most times in Texas, you're getting this whole, it's all sorts of stuff that's coming out of the ground. And so the dynamics of that, there's a lot of physical dynamics, and especially in the cold and in the winter, there's some constraints. And that's the challenge for data centers, right? Is the most likely time that you're going to lose power in the Northeast is going to be during an ice storm in the middle of winter when gas prices are exploding, the system's super constrained, and that's when you're going to need it. And, the counter argument is, well, let's go back to diesel. But if you were in Sandy, we were borrowing, and stealing to get diesel trucks to data centers. And that's the whole, challenge of batteries too, right? That's a 2 to 4 hour solution. It's really just a big UPS, but you're just bridging a gap. And so for some of these longer, outages, and a longer outage means anything over 4 hours.
Sure.
Is you're going to have some kind of sustained fuel. And if you can, if you start thinking about the value of this data and the value of what that's, supplying, a lot of times during these critical outages, data and communications is more critical than ever, right? So having those things up and as low latency as you can, there's a huge amount of value to that, which could lend to, all right, we're going to pay for capacity on this pipe, and we're going to buy it, in the gas market that's, blowing up if we have to. But again, going back to prime power, right? If you actually came to the grid as a net generating asset, if you think about what that actually looks like, if I've got effectively a heat rate to my data center, which is going to be cheaper power than probably almost any market in the country, and then I'm able to respond, to the responsive reserve market, or during a total blackout, I'm able to actually put power into the grid that's getting to that, like we talked about, 1 through 50 in that grid that's still on hospitals, police stations, that kind of stuff. I'm now providing them power. And then the other thing you're doing is really enabling renewables, right? Because now I can respond during that handoff between solar and wind and be able to bridge that gap to make those two resources be able to operate better. And so you're really coming to the grid as a significant net asset. And that's what we're,
you got to change the way we talk about it then. Yeah. Because I think it's, You're going to deal with a very sophisticated end user or client who's going to figure out how to get themselves into this because they really just want to sell space, power, and cooling in the form of a KW. But now they're having to operate a business that's upstream of their downstream business. And that's where they're going to need people like you, right?
Well, and I don't know that they actually will.
Well, they'll need someone like you for that.
Right. And also I think, and I think I'm going to be curious to see how this goes because, you know, obviously everybody we're talking to right now says, I don't want to own a power plant. I don't want to operate a power plant. Okay, fine. Then there's a whole bunch of people that have hundreds of millions of dollars and billions of dollars in capital right now.
And they want to own and operate it.
They want to own and operate it, right? And that's where we can work with the two parties in conjunction to manage that. And we're having a bunch of conversations with folks right now about how to, because there's obviously gas risk to manage, then there's power risk to manage, and you need to be able to monitor all of that in real time because everything's happening very kinetically. And that's kind of the genesis of our ecosystem, right? Is everything that's transpiring in that ecosystem is in our ecosystem. And so I don't feel like it's a choice. Like if you really are going to start putting gigawatts of power on the grid, you have to start showing up as an asset or you're dependent on other people out of their own, decisions.
So let's talk about it though, right? Because like I also understood like natural gas as a primary is scary as hell for an operator, right? And especially if you don't have your diesels as your backup.
Because?
Right? Well, what happens if headline privileges go out and there's capacity challenges to where I'm the last person that's going to get that gas, right? So like I could go pick a site that has arbitrarily here 100 acres and they have a tap on that
Right.
land where I could just plug in natural gas, right? But just because I'm plugged into it, unlike a regular utility, I guess much like a regular utility, I'm just as capable of having them withdraw that
in a catastrophic outage.
Right. And that's what I'm going to need it the most, right? So like the reason why I have backup engines is because I'm depending on the utility provider to only be at 99.9%. So for me to get the 5 nines or plus, I need to have some sort of distributed redundant electrical topology that has a backup electrical plant, which is my diesel engines. If I put in natural gas power plant, yes, that's cool if I use it for primary, but not if they can take it away from me like that. I feel like I'm more likely to lose that than I would electricity. Is that wrong?
Yeah, I mean, well, yes and no.
Because I want you to explain that on-load and off-board equilibrium exercise that takes place every minute of the day somewhere in the United States, where how much can I put into that versus how much I'm taking out of it? Like that's a difficult balance, right? And I'm sharing such a massive resource with so many people that I'm the last person that could have access to it as an operator. Am I wrong?
Well, yes and no. So if you think about so there's a big difference between operational flow orders, which happen all the time, which basically means you need to operate within what you've said.
Who's them? Like the midstream guys are the ones that are controlling the
pipeline
pipes?
Operators.
Okay. So like I met Juan from midstream.
Summit. Yeah.
All right. So Summit Midstream. And he was trying to explain it to me. I'm like, okay, so those are the people that sit there.
Well, so that's more gathering. They're more gathering systems. So these are the most, you could be tied into one of those, like a midstream system. But typically what you're going to be tied into is interstate pipes.
Okay.
And so that's like a, Kinder Morgan Energy Transfer. I mean, these are, 30-inch gas pipelines. Okay. So they're huge pipes that are moving massive, massive amounts of gas. And so most likely you're going to have OFOs, which basically says you have said what you're going to do and you just need to do that. And as long as you do that, everybody's cool. So
talk about that. So you're saying you have an on-demand frequency response contract for a year. Let's say you get in the game, right? How's that work? Let's say I have all these engines. I have a data center and I have a 50 megawatt data center arbitrarily. So which means I have 50 megs of diesel engines as a backup.
Right.
Or natural gas. Yeah. How does it work with a utility provider when they come to you and be like, hey, look, we want to be able to have access to that whenever we want it. We're going to pay you to be in a holding pattern, basically.
Well, you wouldn't want to go interruptible. So if you're doing prime power, you're going to buy firm transport.
Okay.
So now you have let's just use round numbers, and let's say that you have 50,000 decks a day that you have firm capacity on. So every single day you have access to 50 1,000 decks. And, obviously your usage isn't going to be perfect. And also if you have a peaker plant on top of your base load, then you are going to flex up or flex down, and you might buy additional capacity. And if you don't use it, then you sell it off that day. But and that all depends on the actual physical flow of gas. So there's kind of two components. One is, do you have firm or interruptible transport? So what percentage of the pie do you actually control? And then how much gas did you actually put in today, and how much did you actually pull out? And so when the OFO happens, if your MDQ, or maximum daily quantity, is 50,000, you have to stay within 5% of that, or you're going to get into a penalty situation. So if that's what I've already nommed and balanced, and I know that's what I need for my power, I'm fine. Right? And I'm going to get the gas that I need. And this is the big difference in interruptible and firm, is if I got firm, I'm good. And most of the time, 99% of the time, that's what's going to happen. It's going to be an OFO. You're going to have to pay attention to it. And quite frankly, there might be some opportunity for a data center to actually flex down a little bit. And, okay, there's a bunch of stuff that we don't need to be running here today. We could run it at a different data center. Let's pull 10% of our load offline. And now you can sell that gas back into the market, which, oh, by the way, you bought for $3 and you just sold for 120. And so
let me tell you how it's going to be different for data centers than it is commercial and industrial, because I could see where they would want to shift the compute loads around.
Right.
But you have metroactive replication, so they're building reliability and redundancy at the network topology now, so they don't need your infrastructure to be so resilient, right? Because they're like, look, we're going to assume you're going to go down at some point. Right. They're just guaranteeing it. They're like, when that happens, we'll replicate into another facility that's within a certain latency distance of this facility. So instead of me putting arbitrarily here 9 megawatts in your basket, I'm going to put 3 in that basket, 3 in that basket, and 3 in that basket, knowing that I'm only going to lose 1% of this.
But doesn't that give this operator even more opportunity to make money in that situation?
Only if you don't utilize what you're buying. Is that what you're talking about?
Right. Well, potentially.
Well, I think like what I was trying to take this all the way back to was figuring out what are the limitations to natural gas. And then that limitation is why the reason why I ask isn't because I'm trying to take away the credibility of what we're going to do. Natural gas is going to be the solution, up, over, and out.
Right.
But the limitation is what's going to drive the next one. And the reason why I give a shit about the next one is because I believe the next one's nuclear, right? And I think that that is going to have the greatest change and impact on humanity, period.
By a mile.
100%. And I want to get to that. I think that we're within 10 years of that. Yep. And I think technology, the demand of emerging technology is what's demanding the shift in power, which will eventually get us to where we can't kick the can down the road and use Band-Aids with natural gas or hydrogen or other formulas until we figure out something that's going to be steady state capable for primary, that is more carbon friendly and has a more economic efficiency.
Well, it's back to density. It's the densest form of energy we have.
Nuclear.
Yeah.
I think it's the reliable, the most scalable too, I think, in my opinion.
And you can scale it down.
Yeah, SMRs.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, look, I was on a submarine. We had an SMR like that could easily sit in a neighborhood close to where I live right now, and I mean, empower that neighborhood.
And provide heat.
Yeah. So, I mean, I do think that that's something that's going to take a little bit of another paradigm shift where people are going to have to detach the dichotomy between nuclear weapons and nuclear power.
For sure.
And I think that there's a lot of people. I talked about Oliver Stone created a movie on Apple called Nuclear Now. Have you seen that one?
I have.
What do you think of that movie?
Yeah, you're talking to a guy that's been saying this is going to happen for 10 years and people laughing at me.
Yeah. But now it's real.
You can ask Sylvia. She's been laughing for 10 years.
Sylvia K?
Yeah, she's on board.
She's seen it all too. Yeah, she knows it all, right?
But no, we've been telling, to your point, like everybody thinks that a nuclear bomb and nuclear power are the same thing. And they're very, very different. And unfortunately, there's been some, Chernobyl, which was a massive design problem, Fukushima.
That was actually human error that injected that. They were be very cavalier in the way they were testing their reactors, right?
And some design things that even if they designed it differently, but were still as cavalier, we probably would still have not heard of it.
Sure.
Right? Same thing with, Fukushima, how their switchgear was set up, how their backup generators set up, had a huge impact on, what that, and so, and this, we've been underwater with these things for 70 years.
And we don't see those submarines laying on the bottom of the ocean. They work, and we've proven that if you have the right culture and the right people that you could keep those reactors working all day long. Right?
100%. So I think, to your point, that solution is coming, and really what's going to drive, I mean, if you look at the three things that are driving electrification, and you have whole cities, like New York City's on a huge push for electrifying everything.
They're like a 5 gig city.
Right.
Right.
Well, it's more than that, but yeah, but they're wanting to electrify everything right now. And again, the big problem is people think that electricity is a fuel. It's not. It's kinetic. It's all it is doing is moving energy from here to here very, very efficiently. And so that always has to come from somewhere, and it has to be coming from somewhere every 3 seconds, right? So, and you can't get it out of balance even for a minute, like literally even for a minute.
Not even for a fraction of a second,
exactly.
Technically.
And that's when frequency response is literally intrasecond. And so that's the first hurdle that people have to understand, is that all of this, it's not gas, which can be balanced hourly. It is instantaneous. It is the most inelastic commodity on earth. And so you always have to be generating exactly as much as you're consuming. And now you have kind of 3 major, the oil field has wildly more electrified than it was, 5 years ago, and especially 10 years ago. You now have electric vehicles, which are, drastically increasing the power load on people's houses and drastically increasing the power load at gas stations, right? If you look at what the demand is of a gas station pre and post electric vehicle charges, like 5x or more. And so you're having massive increase there. The power needed to produce those vehicles is very different than producing a gas-powered car at the plant, because every single one of those, you got to put 100 kilowatt hours in it, plus the whole process of moving a wildly heavier vehicle through that process, plus producing all the batteries. So you have a huge electricity demand for that supply chain. And now you have data centers and AI that are like, hold my beer. And so all 3 of these things are wildly scaling at the same time, and all 3 of these things require density. It's a lot of power in a very small area, whether that's a car or an oil well or a data center or a rack, right? And so again, density is everything that matters. And the reality is we don't have anything that can keep up with this demand right now long term if it continues at this almost logarithmic scale. And so wind and solar can't keep up, oil and gas can't keep up. And so I agree with you. I think 10 years from now, and we're working on fusion, we're working on a whole bunch of other stuff, but I don't think any of that is nearly as near term as nuclear is. And you have kind of 2 big hurdles, right? You have the technology, which there's a lot of, to your point, proven technology out there. You've also been scaring the public to death for 50 years.
Greenpeace,
right, that this is a nuclear bomb next to your house, right? Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if 50 years from now, there's a nuke this big that powers your car for the life of the car.
100%.
Right? So, and there's like I don't know if you've seen these nuclear powered, they're called nuclear diamond batteries. They're basically taking like a piece of spent fuel the size of a grain of rice and encapsulating it in a man-made diamond, and it can power your phone for like 11 years. So there's all these technologies that are coming out around that, and how that all works out. But to your point, it's very low carbon, but most importantly, it's super dense and super stable. Like a nuke plant comes up and runs for 18 months and then comes back down. Doesn't care what the weather's doing, doesn't care what the market's doing. We're just running. Here's your power. And if you think about what a data center wants to do, same thing. So density is all that matters. But between now and 10 years from now, we have a massive, voracious power demand, not just from data centers, but electrifying all these cities that want to convert everything to electric, and then all these people that want to drive an electric vehicle, and then all the oil and gas space that's continuing. I mean, they're not going to put frack on the grid, because it's like 30, 40 megawatt light switches, and there's hundreds of them, right? So all of these challenges are happening at the same time, and there's a 10-year gap between now and then where if you want to be able to do ChatGPT and all these, AI powered things, there is a massive power gap that's got to get filled. And natural gas is the only thing that's able to step into that
volume.
Right. At that volume. Right. And we'll continue to build out renewables. We're continuing to do all sorts of interesting things with like RNG and other solutions.
But the main the workhorse application for renewables will be natural gas.
For sure.
Yep.
It has to enable them. And like there's supercritical CO2 natural gas, which is super interesting, which is zero emissions natural gas. But we're still in the development stage. That a boatload of money behind that. And who knows, that could come online.
I think that will be something too. I remember like when we were building data centers, I remember, I started off building hospitals and then we're doing more of these things that are now called data centers. And I remember talking to building engineers like, why do I need a UPS system? I have a generator. And we're like, well, listen, man, and then how about this? Go back and talk to that same guy 3 years ago, or, 3 years later. And I was like, hey, I'm here to add that secondary UPS. He's like, why the hell would I need 2 of them? And I'm like, that's the design now, right? But we're iterating, we're evolving, we're adapting. And I think that, we're bringing this all together. I do agree with you. I always overlook the EV side, but I don't want to because that's the part where I try to appeal to like the Elon Musks of the world, where I'm like, this industry is not going to iterate and really make the transformational change it needs to until we have an iconic change agent like that, a luminary that changes and transforms industry. Carnegie, like you could talk about Bill Gates, Michael, I don't care. There's so many people, Larry Page, there's people that just change everything. The biggest luminaries and changing pioneers of industry, I think one of them is going to come from this space. I think the
lifeblood of the planet. I mean, that's that's why we've created the ledge. It's why what we're doing is if you can understand how all of these things are functioning in real time. Yeah, it's behind everything from hospitals to stock trading to.
I try to tell people the pattern. You and I talked about this. The first industrial revolution, 1760 on, we got a lot of things. Got the cotton gin. We did a lot of things that allowed us to create industry, which had a lot of unintended consequences. But the first byproduct that we got out of it of gain was the steam engine, which created the locomotive engine, which transformed the West. Then we had a break between the first and second industrial revolution. And we had that's where we had the automobile, right? And we also introduced both currents, AC and DC. And that's at the end of the second industrial revolution, because of World War I, we had this like huge pause that got us through Prohibition, the Depression, World War II, Korea, and then Vietnam. And then we got into the third, which was more nuclear power. And then fourth, which was like quantum compute and AI. And I mean, there's a lot of powers, but every industrial revolution has power. In 2020, we started at the end of COVID, the fifth industrial revolution. What do you think the theme of power is going to be for the fifth industrial revolution? Do you think that it'll be this homogenous relationship that we have with nuclear at some point, and that'll be the profound? Every industrial revolution has given us power. This unintended consequences that come with it, and we've done a lot of things in that. That's a whole nother level of topic.
Well, and it's when you say power, you mean energy, right?
I mean a new form of energy that transforms society. Right. I believe that it is the data center, which will finally be the one that triggers the first domino to fall. The demand of compute technology, I should say. So let me back up for anybody that's listening. We consumers, as well as the businesses that support and provide services for us consumers, we live in a service-based economy, right? So we want things as consumers, and businesses create those things for us. So either those businesses are drawing the demand for aggregate volumes of massive talent and power, or we consumers are demanding it from those application businesses that are now creating cloud-based businesses that are going to be aggregating into data centers and need large volumes of power. We as consumers drive that. The businesses solve that answer. What are we as consumers and the businesses that solve that answer going to we'll eventually arrive at something to where now the demand is so massive for what we need that we have to slow down because the solutions we have today are unscalable and untenable. Do you agree?
Yeah. And I think if you look at every industrial revolution, it was all about energy density again. Yes. It became denser and denser and denser.
Steam engine, electricity, motor vehicle, quantum, nuclear energy.
Well, lasers, right? I mean, everything's driving on fiber optics it's all lasers. So, and then I'm not even in military applications, laser weapons are becoming
railguns for sure. Can you imagine AC-130 with a railgun sitting out of it? Exactly. Pew, pew. It's like a video game in a plane. Yeah. But my thing is like there's so many things. The fifth industrial revolution is upon us. There is something big that's going to take place in society from power. I think we consumers of technology, the technology engine for the sky for the cloud and the home for AI is a technology engine that's a common plant, and that requires large volumes of power, which is why we're talking. We are already really good at building data centers. now we're like, we can't just build the data center, and the operators themselves, as well as the enterprises, can't afford for us to only solve for one and they will only solve for the other. We have to marry those into one thing. So the data center and the capacity for power and energy that goes with it is going to be one product. And that is the fifth utility. Because you as like the more technology, the more commodity evolves in technology's basis, the more, like, your refrigerator will tell you that you're out of ketchup, or your washer and dryer will tell you to get more detergent. Or does that make sense? Like,
well, it's all the things merging, right? I mean, that was the whole premise of the iPhone, right? With his whole introduction, it was a phone, and could do all three things at one time.
Surf the internet, play your music.
Exactly. And so I think you're going to continue to see. I mean, it's kind of the basis for sci-fi, right? Is where all of these things become one utility.
I agree.
Maybe it ends up being a chip in your brain.
We're talking about that too. Yeah, there's a whole kinds of talk about
that. But I think if you really think about the challenges that we're facing, and the thermodynamic challenge of just, you have power generation over here that's putting off tons of heat, and then you have load over here that's putting off tons of heat. And then this whole distributed system of a power and gas grid that have to figure out how to work together, as well as with renewables and some of the other things that are coming online, which are also very spread out and require a whole lot of infrastructure. And then you look at especially density and ability to be at the point of load of nuclear, like it's a paradigm shift in what it does.
Changes economy.
Completely. I mean, if you think about, hydrogen through electrolysis, desalinization, like all of these things that are very difficult and expensive right now.
Yeah, expensive. They just don't pencil.
But now, I mean, you have abundant, dirt cheap, super stable, flat power generation, right? And so there's all sorts of things that completely shift. And does that, create more hydrogen in vehicles, or does it make more electric vehicles? I mean, all these things are going to or does it make nuclear vehicles?
I think that there's a rail system coming. You know what I'm saying? I feel
high speed rail.
I just feel like we're going to eventually have, I think it's going to be more magnetic electricity.
Maglev.
Yeah. So I think that I've had some big fat brains sitting on this podcast, or that I just get to talk to. And like the conversion of hydrogen into ammonia so you could transport it and reconvert it and use it again. I just don't see that being.
Some of that's games though. Like there's so many games that are getting played across all of these different systems of making something look renewable, or when you really do the overall carbon footprint, it's like, wait a minute, is that really?
Can you scale it? Everything has to be, can you scale?
100%.
And I don't know if that scales. I think that we're at a point where we're going to use every Band-Aid we can to get through the next 5 to 10 years.